Hello and welcome to this video tutorial on Toonboom Harmony. So this is going to be the first in a series of videos, and this video is going to be really important because I'm going to try to set a foundation for us to build off of when working in Toonboom. So the first thing that I'm going to concentrate on in this video is how to save and manage your projects, and we'll go over that relatively quickly, and then from there I'm going to start to introduce the interface and kind of give us a foundation to work off of. So to get started, I'm going to open up Harmony right here. And so the first thing to note when kind of managing your projects right here is Toonboom Harmony is going to create a folder for the scene right here. So let's just kind of create a project or a scene. So I'm just going to call this online demo. And you can see this is going to save to my desktop. And I'm using standard HD 24 frames per second project right here. And so when I create the scene, it's going to create this folder right here. And let's kind of talk about this before we really get started with the program here. So when I click on this, you can see that it creates a folder structure for us. And so Toonboom works less like a program like Microsoft Word or Photoshop where you're just saving one file and that's it. And it works a little bit more like Maya or Premiere or After Effects where you have a folder structure that you're saving into and it's linking to those files. And so you can see it starts out like this. And I'm going to just quickly save my project so that we can see how this updates when we save the project, even though there's nothing going on within my scene yet. So I'll just go File, Save. And so you can see that that folder structure changed where my project's now in there and it's updated. So two really important things to note is, first off, when you're working in Harmony, I really recommend that you try to work locally on your computer. So in this example, I'm working off of my desktop, but you could work in your documents folder just anywhere locally on your computer instead of an external hard drive. It can experience problems that I found in my personal experience when you start to work off of external hard drives. So that's the first note. And then the second note is when it comes time to move your project, back it up or save it, you're going to take this whole folder and move that, to your backup location right there, rather than saving just, the scene that's within it here. So that's part of the setup. And there's one last thing I want to show you in terms of just project management. And this is something that's kind of cool about Toonboom that's not necessarily the case in those other programs that I compared it to, like Premiere and Maya. So I have this turnaround image right here. It's just a JPEG. And I'm going to quickly show how to import an image. And this also works for audio files and Toonboom. Is when I import an image, I'll kind of import it right here. And it's automatically going to create a copy and move it into that folder. So you don't really have to do the file management when setting up your projects. It's going to do it for you as you work right here. So I have my project right here. And let's say that I want to import that turnaround so that when I'm animating, I can kind of stay on model right here. So I go to File, Import, and Images right here. And I'm just going to browse and find that JPEG right here. And press OK. And you can see it shows up in my timeline right there. And so let me just go ahead and save my project right here. And when I double check on the folder right here and I go under Elements, you can see that it creates a copy for me of the turnaround. So it's automatically kind of backed it up and saved it into this folder structure for me right there. So those are some important things to kind of know about when in terms of file management and just kind of dealing with Harmony in general right here. So now that we've established how to save a project, manage a project, organize it and all that, let's go over the interface here. So I'm going to delete this image that we imported in just a quick moment here, but first, and kind of get onto the interface, but first I want to just show a couple of things right here. So when you import an image, there's this little icon right here that looks like a little person right here. If you click on that, you can see you can always kind of expand your layers, and this can be really helpful when you get into animation right here, because you can see it gives us the information of it starts at 1, ends at 60, and we can just get a better view of the layer right here. But also we have this opacity slider, so I can just click and drag to the left and change the opacity right there. And if you want to kind of make it small again, you can collapse it just by pressing that button right there. Something else that you might notice is when I click on the drawing layer right here, it'll kind of go at half opacity right here. So we're in camera mode right now. There's also drawing mode, and I'm going to go over that in a later tutorial, but especially, I mean, the vast majority of the time I'm working in camera mode, and especially early on, just make sure you're on camera mode, and if anything's kind of behaving strangely, just kind of make sure that you're looking at that view right there. But something that's nice about it is you can see all the layers while you're working, but just the one that you have selected is going to kind of adjust to be at full opacity automatically right there. One thing you'll notice about camera mode is we have this kind of bounding box right here, and that's indicating if we were to render, that's anything inside of that box will render, anything outside of that box will not show up in your render. So let's just go ahead, I'm going to hold shift, and then I'm going to right click on these layers, and I'm just going to go ahead and delete them right here. So to get started here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a drawing layer. And so I'm just going to click and hold down this plus button that's right here above the timeline and go to drawing right here. And you'll notice that this box will come up, and I'll just call this drawing 1 right here. And within each drawing layer that you create, there is line art, and then there's a color art layers right here. And you have the choice to choose between vector and bitmap for each of these layers right here. And so bitmap is an art layer that behaves the way Procreate or Photoshop works, that's pixel based, and it's really good for creating like organic drawings, especially when you're early on in the animation project and you just want it to feel like pencil on paper. This is what you want right there. And then vector art works more like Adobe Illustrator, for instance, or Adobe Animate, and it's really good for tie downs and cleanup for kind of like the finished animation if you're going for like that cell animated look. And we can toggle between the line art and the color art with these two buttons right here on the interface. And so I'll just add and close right there. And right now, if I were to begin to draw, it's on this gray background, and I would much rather work on a white background, and there's a couple ways to handle that. But what I like to do is I like to create what's called a color art layer that creates just like a white sheet underneath. And you just do that by clicking this plus button, and then just going down to, where is it? There we go, color card right there. And you can see the color card shows up on top of the drawing layer at first, and it has these weird like gray boxes on it. That's because it's selected right there. So let me just drag it underneath the drawing layer. And then when I select my drawing layer, you can see those boxes go away right there. So remember, I'm in vector mode right here, and I'm going to do a much more detailed tutorial on this coming up. But just to kind of get things started, I like to just, there's a few tools that I like to use for vector art, but let's just show the pencil tool right here. And I definitely, with vector art, I much prefer the pencil tool to the brush tool. Some people like the brush tool, but not me. So let's kind of do an intro demo right here. So we have the line art and then the color art layer. And something that's cool that you'll see me do in future demonstrations is you can go into preferences and give yourself 4 layers to work off of right here. So remember, I'm working in vector right here. I want to create, so let's just animate something really quick using vector. So if I want to create a new empty sheet, I press on this this icon right here, and that's going to give me a new empty sheet to work off of right here. And you can see it lasts 1 frame right there. So let's say that I want to extend it to frame 10, just, you know, as we're getting started with our keyframing process. So I can press F5 on my keyboard, and if you're on a Mac, you have to hold Function and then press F5, and that's what I do most of the time. But you can also right-click if you can't remember that shortcut. So you just right-click on the frame that you're trying to extend to, and you can see Extend Exposure, F5 right there, and that'll make it so this drawing lasts 10 frames right there. So let's just draw a smiley face right here. So we can see that I'm on the pencil tool, and we have the size right here, and we can choose between all these different options right here. And remember, this is vector based, so this is going to behave a lot like a vector file like Adobe Illustrator. So I'm just going to draw a circle right here, and you can see it's pretty wiggly right there. And so something you can do is you can boost up centerline smoothing, and that's going to make my line much more forgiving right there when I'm drawing it. So I will just kind of draw this. And when it comes to cleanup right here within vector art, what I like to do is, so I use the pencil tool right here, and we have the select tool up here. And so with the select tool, I can click it, and it works like a lasso tool right here. So I just do a lasso selection. You can also just drag and select straight through, and it'll make the selection there. And I can hold my cursor over it, and I can kind of move this and reposition it right here. But you can see when I drew my circle right here, I actually did this intentionally, as I kind of gave myself these two little handles on the outside right there. And so when I clean up my vector art, what I like to do is I just click and hold down on the select button, and then I go down to my cutter tool right here. And with the cutter tool, remember we have the tool properties, and so this kind of updates depending on which tool, the tool properties over on the right, depending on which layer I'm on. So I'm on the cutter tool. And something I like to do is, they should just make this the default, is just click on this little button right here, and we're just going to choose round instead of a hard tip right there. I'll show you what it looks like as a hard tip, and then I'll switch it to round right here. So with the cutter tool, what it does is we can cut off these handles right here and just kind of clean up our work right here. And so with the cutter tool, select them, just drag and select like that. And it cuts it for us right there, and it gives us this clean shape. But you'll notice that when I zoom in, sorry, I zoomed in too much, it creates this awkward bevel right there. And so to kind of get around that, what I like to do is, I'll press edit undo, is with the cutter tool, with this button right here, I just click it, and then I make sure that's set to round. And so now when I cut it, it's not going to be perfect, but it at least like connects in there, right there. And so this next step is going to be really familiar to anybody who's used Adobe Illustrator before. Is, you know, in Adobe Illustrator, you have your main select tool right here, and then we have this, this selection tool right here, which lets you select anchor points that are created, and then move these Bezier handles to fine tune your work right here. So I can just select this Bezier handle right here, and you can see I can kind of adjust and clean up my artwork right here. And so the way that Bezier handles work is just the wider apart they are, the more rounded that surface is going to seem near that anchor point. I can also, again, I can move the anchor point itself just by clicking on the anchor point and moving it right there. And again, this is all within the direct select tool. And then I can also, the closer the Bezier handles are, the sharper that edge is going to feel right there. So just kind of depends on what you're going for. I'm going for something a little more rounded right here. So I'll just drag and select that out. And if I want to move the whole thing, I just go to the select tool. You can circle it, or you can just drag straight through it and move it down a little bit. So I'm going to make like a small little demon character or something. So I'm going to use the pencil tool right here and just create some horns right here. And notice that when I'm working with vector, I like to just kind of give myself some extra room right there when drawing. And let me zoom in by pressing Z. And remember, I can use the cutter tool to clean this up. And I have it set to round, so these Beziers are going to look pretty clean from the start right here when I'm just kind of deleting these handles right there. And I just press delete right there to delete that. Okay, so I have this character right here. And I'm just going to make a 2-frame animation. This is going to be really simple. I mainly just want to show you like broad view from the trees, how to use the software right here. So for frame 2, let's say that I want this to only last 9 frames right here. It's really, the way that you adjust this is pretty straightforward in terms of your timing within this timeline right here. I can just select on the frame I want to delete, and I just press delete on my keyboard, and it's gone right there. And if I want a second drawing, I'm just going to click on frame 10. Same thing I did before. I'm going to create an empty drawing right there. You can see it only lasts 1 frame right now. And if I want to zoom in on my timeline right here, I can press 2 to zoom in, 1 to zoom out. And you can also see I can grab the slider right here with a magnifying glass and zoom in and out right there. When I'm zoomed in, you can use this bar right here to change the view. I'm pressing 1 right here to zoom back out. So if I want to extend this back out, remember it's F5 on your keyboard. or you click on the frame you want, right click, and then you go to extend exposure right here. And so now we have one drawing that lasts 9 frames. Now let's create a second drawing. Now you can see when I create my second drawing, I don't have a good idea of where my first drawing was. And so let's turn on onion skinning. I'm going to explain onion skinning for just a moment. So this button right here enables onion skinning. And when I turn on onion skinning, this red and green little thing comes up right there. So it's not there. Now it shows up. So the previous frame shows up as red. The future frame shows up as green right there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very quickly create a middle drawing right here. So I'm just going to, this is going to be a really bad animation, but we're just trying to kind of give you a view from the trees right here, right? So under select, I'm going to do the cutter tool and just do some really quick cleanup on this. And remember with the contour editor, I can select on that and then just grab that bezier right there and clean that edge up a little bit, right? So this is a nice thing about the pencil tool is we can use these other tools with anchor points, particularly if you're familiar with like Adobe Illustrator and you're comfortable with it. You can make some really fine-tuned adjustments and kind of create some nice cleanup right there. Using a combination of the cutter tool, the contour editor, which is this white selection tool, and then the main selection tool right there. Okay, and so let's create one more drawing right here where the little character just goes off to screen right. So I'm going to create a new empty drawing, press F5 to extend it, and from here I'm just going to create a drawing where they're mostly off frame. And remember, with the camera view right here, this box is the bounding box. Anything that shows up outside of the box is not going to show up in your render right here, right? So that's why I was not very careful with how I drew a lot of this. So under the select tool, cutter tool, just delete that. Okay, so we have an animation. We have frame 1, or sorry, drawing 1, drawing 2, drawing 3 right there. And let's kind of return our attention to the onion skinning. So right now, that red right here, so we're not seeing any onion skinning right now because we're on drawing 2, but it lasts for 10 frames. And these handles don't extend to the previous frame. So if I want to see the previous frame, I need to draw that out. And if I want to see the future frame, I can draw that out right there. And something that's cool about Harmony here is we can actually fine-tune our onion skinning a lot more than this. So to do that, if you're interested in doing that, is you can go to Windows and then go to onion skinning right here. So Windows and onion skin. And I'll go into this in more detail later on, but just to see, you can kind of change the opacity as it kind of fades off into the background, but you can also or how the opacity tapers as you're working on more complicated animations, but you can also change the colors, right? So if I want the previous frame to be red instead of purple, I can just click on it right there, change the color down here. And if I want this color to just be more of like a different green, I'll press OK right there. So you can kind of change the way that your onion skinning appears right there. So let's turn off onion skinning. And let's go over this timeline just a little bit more and get a little more in depth right here. So with the timeline, we have the play button right here. We have the loop button right here. So let's just press play. All right. And so you can see the animation, if I drag the playhead, it goes all the way to here, and then it loops back to the beginning. So if you want to kind of change the range that you're working with, is you can just click on this red bracket and drag it back to frame 30. And now when I press play, it'll loop like that. Let's say, for instance, that you want to change the start of your animation right here. We can turn our attention to this little zone right here. So this shows the current frame in question right here. So you can see we're on frame 12 right there. This is the end range, which is what we just changed with the bracket right there. And to change the start range, I like to just press these little buttons right here to kind of change the beginning of the loop right there. And so now, if I wanted, hypothetically, if I wanted my preview range to go from 10 to 30, now when I press play, you can see it loops to frame 10 right there. And if I want to bring it back, I can either type in the number 0 or just press that button down to kind of bring that back, or sorry, to 1, and bring that to frame 1 right there. So that's some important information in terms of onion skinning and the basics of how to kind of deal with this timeline right here. And you'll be surprised how much you can do with what I've shown you so far. With onion skinning, the brackets, creating an empty drawing, and just deleting and moving around frames right there. So one thing I really want to turn my attention to now is, remember, we're using vector art. I'm going to show bitmap next right here, and both are really important. But within vector art, we have the line art and the color art layer. And let me show you the advantage of doing your line art on the line art layer and then your color in the color art layer, specifically within vector layers. So right here, I have my line art on frame 1 right here. And let's say I want to color this in. In Adobe Animate and a lot of other programs, I would just kind of stay on my one layer and let's go to Tool Properties. And I need to kind of show my color palette right here. And so if I wanted to fill in my character, I just fill it in right there. But the problem with that is my color art and my line art are all on the same layer. And so it gets really hard to like adjust things after the fact. It just gets like a little clunky in there. And so what we do in Toonboom Harmony is I can select my line art right here. And remember, the tool properties always updates depending on which tool that you're selecting on over here. And we're going to look for this button right here. And so this button is called Create Color Art from Line Art. And what this does is it copies the vector information from this line art and copies an invisible version that doesn't show up in your render onto the color art. And it makes it so that you can kind of paint in to the color art separately right here. You can also, so you can find the button right here. You can also find the button up here as well. So I'm going to click on that button, and now I'm going to move to my color art layer right there, and you can see that it shifted to blue with these little icons right there. And if you don't see that, press the shortcut K. K as in Kellogg's. So I press K and you can see the strokes disappeared. If I press K, they'll reappear right here. And so now, let me add a new color into my color palette right here. I guess I could use one of these existing colors, but I guess since this is an intro, I'll just stick with an existing color. Is when I go to the paint bucket tool, I fill in the color art, and it goes in like that. If the paint bucket tool doesn't work for you, that's because there's a gap somewhere in one of these lines right here. And the reason there wasn't a gap is because I was using the cutter tool, you know, and you remember when I was drawing my lines and I was having line art, you know, overlay like that, and then I was using the cutter tool to remove it. The reason I was doing that technique earlier is so that when I do the paint bucket tool, there's not going to be big gaps right there. And this process is going to go much more smoothly for you, kind of following that process right there. And so something that's nice about that is our color art and our line art separate. And so remember, we've been in our camera mode this whole time. If we switch over to the drawing mode right here, you can see that if you click on this eye icon right here within the drawing mode, I can see that my color art's right there, my line art's right there. And within this drawing mode is helpful for just being able to kind of see your different layers separately right here. And one other thing to note is if it only shows in the drawing layer whatever layer is currently selected. So if I had another drawing layer in here, and I'll just quickly create one, and I'll just call this trash, add and close. You can see I'm in my drawing mode right here, and the trash layer, drawing layer, is selected, and I can't see my other drawing layer anymore. So I have to have the layer selected and then the color art layer selected in order to see the drawing mode. And that's kind of the main use of the drawing view in my view. You can also, if you want to be able to see the other layers, so let's just say under the trash layer, I'll just kind of draw this little star up here. And I'm in the drawing view and I want to see both. You just turn on this lightbox button right here, and it kind of behaves like an actual lightbox where you can kind of see translucency between layers right there. But I'm mainly showing you the drawing layer just so that you can see that the line art and the color art layers are kind of separated right there. Again, I really highly recommend just stay on the camera view, especially early on in the process. So let me right click, delete this layer. And so let's fill in the rest of these layers real quick, just to continue this process. So I have drawing 1, so drawing 2. I want to fill this in, so I'm on my line art layer right here. I'm looking for this button right here, which copies the line art layer into the color art right there. And when I press on the color art, I should be able to see this blue line, these blue lines created right there. And I'm working with red, and I'm doing the paint bucket tool. And for me, this is going to work because I'm just used to this and I know how to kind of fill this in without having gaps. Let's just say that this is not filling in because there's a gap in the artwork. So let me just press zoom in on it, and let's see if I can mess this up on purpose right here. Okay, so let me paint bucket that in. So I'm going to create a problem for myself intentionally. So let's say that I have on my line art layer, I've kind of drawn this in, and there's a gap right here. And so there's a few things you can do to make sure that you don't have gaps when you're drawing in your art layer right here. The first is when I use my pencil tool, if I drag down, let me see if I have this tool correctly. So there's auto close gap right there. So if I press K to reveal my stroke on the line art layer, you can see that tool right there. So I'm in my pencil tool and I have that button selected. It automatically fills that gap. So now when I do the paint bucket tool, it fills in for me right there. Something else that you can do, and this doesn't work as well as that first one, is with the paint bucket tool, you can try to have it set to close large gaps right there, and that'll make it a little more forgiving when you're filling in your artwork. And then the final thing that you can do, let's say that you've drawn something with the pencil tool and you haven't clicked on this button right here. And so I've kind of drawn my little horn, but you can see when I press K to reveal the stroke, it's not filling that gap right there. Kind of a final thing that you can do to fill a gap is if I click on the paint bucket tool and go to stroke right here, what it does is it lets me manually draw in these blue strokes right there. Did you see that, how it kind of automatically creates it? And so now, and that's hidden underneath the paint bucket tool, so it's called the stroke tool. And so now when I do the paint bucket there, even if I, I'm filling this all in on the line art, right? So if I click on that, copy the line art down to the color art, and fill that in, that's going to work right there. And remember on this layer, when I used the pencil tool, I was using the pencil tool and I had this button right here turned on. And so again, what that button does is it just fills in the gaps for you right there. So again, I press K to kind of reveal the stroke so I can see the gaps. So I'm on the line art layer and I just select that region right there, press this button to copy it down to the color art, and it should, let's see, let me try that again. So there we go, copy it down, color art, and I fill it in. It should fill in for me right there. And so let's just, as a final one, let's fill this one in. So I have, again, line art, select it, copy it down, color art, paint bucket tool, fill it in right there. And so now I should have an animation like that. And remember, I can just go in with the selection tool, and first I deleted the line art, now I went to the color art and deleted that. And so now I'll go back to my color art, press play, and you can see my animation starting to happen right there. So that's kind of an introduction to the vector art drawing layer. And additionally, some of the fundamentals of working with the timeline and the workspace right here. That'll be really important to get you started. Let me real quick, before we wrap up this tutorial, let's talk about the other kind of drawing layer. So I'm going to hide the visibility of this one just by toggling that on and off right there. I'll go to plus and add a new drawing layer right here. And instead, I'm just going to make this bitmap. So I'll call this bitmap animation. Add and close. And so this works very similar, right? So there's not too many differences. The fundamental difference is that vector art is good for like cleanup, and it works more like Adobe Illustrator. Bitmap works a little bit more like Procreate or Photoshop, where it's raster based and it's more organic and really good for like sketching out your animations right here. So, but other than that, it works the same. Another thing that I should mention is with Bitmap, what I was showing you with like filling in your artwork doesn't work the same, right? So again, I really like to use Bitmap for sketching, but for my final animation, I definitely prefer to use my vector layers. So Bitmap, let's show this off a little bit. So to create an empty drawing layer, this is all going to work the same. So I create an empty drawing by pressing that button right there. If I want to extend it, I press F5 or right click and extend the exposure right there. And so when I draw, instead of using the pencil tool, I like to use the brush tool here. And when you're using the brush tool, we have size, flow, opacity right here. I'll make a video in the future where I'll show you how to customize these a lot deeper right here. But we have more organic, oops, zoomed in too much, Z and then option to zoom out. And I'll just delete that. Here we go. So I like to use the brush tool, remember, for the bitmap layers. And so you can see right here that this is just kind of working a lot more like a Photoshop layer right there. And so I have the brush tool, I have the erase tool. I can set this to be all kinds of erasers right here. So right now it's set to like a rough paper so that it's kind of, you know, feel a little bit more like a hand-drawn kind of thing right there. Remember the select tool still works on bitmap layers, so I can click on that, drag through, delete. I'll talk more about colors in a future video, but again, I can kind of go in here and change the color of my brush right here. So let me do a similar animation where I'll just kind of draw my little horned character right here. And again, we can customize this brush to kind of have it behave, you know, pretty much any way you want, just like in Photoshop or Procreate right here. But I have drawing one right here, and notice that I'm working on my line art layer. And notice right here that it's just, there might be ways that you can copy it from line art to color art layer that I haven't experimented with, but just generally speaking, I really like to use this for kind of like sketching out my animations where I just really want it to feel like pencil and paper. So right here, I can just add a new keyframe, and I can press F5 to extend it. Remember that the onion skinning works exactly the same way as before, so I can just kind of, you know, continue to draw my character. My volumes right now are all over the place, but that's okay. And create an empty drawing, F5, extend it. And I have onion skinning turned on right now, so I can kind of see the previous frames. If I want to see more previous frames, I'll extend it like that. And I can turn off onion skinning, and then when I play it back, it should play right there. And some last things that I want to note right here is, so try to stay in your camera view, especially during these early stages right here. The one last thing that I can think of that I haven't mentioned so far is this whole time I have been working in the OpenGL view mode right here. And if you click on this, it's going to go to render view. And so that's basically going to show you what your frame would look like should you render it right now. And with the render view, you can see this box gets darker outside right here. And when I press play, you can see that animation's not happening anymore. So in order to kind of play back renders from this render view, which is this kind of greenish, bluish little gear icon right there, I need to press this button right here, and that's render and play. It's going to render out my animation and open up the secondary play software. And we'll just need to give it a second to boot up. It's going to load the frames, and then it'll play from there. So that's just so you know about it. Again, when I'm animating, especially in these early stages, I just like to stay in OpenGL view mode, and I like to stay on the camera view mode right here. And remember, a big part of this lesson right here is that we have line art, color art right here. So in future tutorials, I'll continue to build off of this, but this is kind of like the big long video where I'm going to go over, where I went over a bunch of stuff. And in future videos, we're going to make shorter videos that kind of build off of this and give you extra tips and tools to kind of build off of this foundation.